There is an old adage that says that there are two types of people in the world: those who believe that there are two types of people and those who don't. Among the former was a Greek poet who claimed that people tend to be either foxes or hedgehogs. Foxes are centrifugal, while hedgehogs are centripetal. The fox knows many things, he said, but the hedgehog knows one big thing. I have long admired the work of Walter Hamady. His extraordinary handmade letterpress books, his prankish wit, his collages and assemblages. But now and then I've asked myself, was Walter a fox or a hedgehog? A fox is uncommonly clever, resourceful, and adaptive. Indeed, it has such agility that we never know what to expect from one moment to the next. A hedgehog, on the other hand, moves slowly and decisively. It survives by reliably standing its ground, albeit encased in an armor of barbs. Each of these cognitive styles has advantages and disadvantages, and throughout human history, both have repeatedly proven to be enormously effective. It goes without saying that Walter was in many ways fox-like. He was commonly called a polymath. His interests, skills, and insights were so wide-ranging, so diverse and unforeseeable, that almost everything he did defied easy classification. At times, his meandering flights were reminiscent of a Persian carpet, and at other times of the crazy quilts that farm wives made from the leftover scraps of conventional quilts. Walter's never-ending quest, the term quixotic comes to mind, his craving for innovation and the complex and bewildering forms he wrought came from juxtamorphing art with literature, typography, teaching, parenting, letterpress printing, paper-making, book arts, collage, and assemblage. The writer Donald Barthelme said that the central principle of all art of the 20th century is collage. Walter Hamady liked to say that all life is a collage, and surely he himself was that, a mix of antipodal cultures, in the sense that he had come from the short-lived marriage of a loving, intelligent mother who was a pediatrician, intellectual, and bibliophile from Keokuk, Iowa, and a Lebanese father he grew to despise for abandoning the family. In his formative years, Walter's role model, in the place of his absent father, was his devoted Jiddu, his paternal grandfather, Ralph Hatum Hamady, a wonderful man from Bakleen, Lebanon, who came to America as a teenager in 1907. Like a storybook fox, a fleet-footed, wily survivor, Walter was perforce evasive, diversionary, and ironic. In talking or writing or working, one moment he alighted here, and a second later over there. If and when he did alight, he was always and simply the person he was. Walter Hamady, founder and proprietor of the Perishable Press Limited, originator of the Shadwell paper mill, and professor at the University of Wisconsin at Madison. But he also wore the chimerical masks of Walter Samuel Hatum Hamady, Walter Semi-Hittite Hamady, W.S.H. Voltaire the Hamada, and a roster of other identities that were hit and miss and hit on purpose and all at the same time. Like others whom we hasten to call creative, Walter was all but driven by behavior that sociologists call the play instinct. This is especially evident in the lack of restraint in his toying, his juxtamorphing with anything and everything, materials, techniques, objects, and words. In its verbal forms, it produced a limitless trickle of puns, spoonerisms, malapropisms, and comical nicknames. I don't think any two of the hundreds of letters and parcels that he sent to me were ever addressed to the same person, much less the right person. On any envelope, I might find that I was listed as Roy Ball Behrens, Corduroy, Roy D'Amoto, Roy Blastoff Behrens, R. Bobo, Bobbing Links Golf Course Books, King Roy of the Behrens Hens, Bear Old Bob Ends, and so on. In that sense, he was not unlike Mark Van Doren's father, as recounted in that writer's autobiography, an Illinois farmer who delighted in, quote, calling things by the wrong names, or it may be the right ones, fantastically the right ones. Either extreme is poetry, of which he had the secret without knowing that he did. While Walter was as crafty as a fox, one can as easily argue that he was also a hedgehog. Think about it. How many people in our time have mastered the archaic practice of letterpress printing? And of those, how many have pursued that craft for reasons that are not merely nostalgic or therapeutic, but radically experimental? Indeed, how many even write letters today? By which I mean genuine, thoughtful prose, not user-mindless sound tattoos in the guise of email snippets, text messages, and emoji. It is less known that Walter was pivotal in the rebirth of the interest in the nuanced qualities of handmade paper, in the course of which, as one might expect, he used it in wholly unorthodox ways. For example, if you can believe it, he once shredded a copy of my early book about art and camouflage, long out of print and hard to find, to make it into paper pulp with which he camouflaged my book in a page of one of his own. Hamady's letterpress books are admired for his irreverent approach to book construction, enabled by his mastery of typesetting, letterpress printing, and innovative page layout. His achievements in all these areas distinctly stand alone in part because he was compelled to be a sort crosser, a person who blatantly crosses the bounds of our most hallowed traditions. Nowhere is this more aptly shown than in his so-called gabberjabs, a long-lived sequence of letterpress books that have no equivalent in the category of handmade artist books. To repeat, the fox knows many things, but the hedgehog knows one big thing. If Walter was a hedgehog as well as a fox, what was the one big thing he knew? I think I have known the answer to that from the moment I first confronted one of his artworks, not a book, but a box-like assemblage, at a gallery exhibition in Wisconsin in the mid-1970s. Being diversionary, he rarely spoke straightforwardly on his various trade secrets, but he left telltale breadcrumbs in his letters, his writings, his lectures, and, by tacit example, in each and all of the things he made. In particular, he was prone to offering clues about his modus operandi whenever he talked about teaching, which he practiced sincerely and tirelessly at the University of Wisconsin at Madison from 1966 until his retirement from teaching more than 30 years later. In a document he drafted in 2003, titled Hamady's Problems, a Pedagogical Ramble, among his recommendations was that traditional principles should be studied, understood thoroughly, and forgotten. In another document, which takes the form of his own spurious obituary, he recalls of teaching that, quote, if successful, by the end of each semester, the students thought that all they had learned had been invented by themselves. In other words, the one big thing that Walter Hedgehog Hamady knew was that teaching and art-making and letter-writing and parenting and being married, along with all the other ilks of existential mindfulness, are best when they are transactional, interactive, and dynamic. Like Paris, they are a movable feast. As much as we might otherwise want, our lives are rarely preordained, but consist of distillations of an elusive, unstoppable stream that is best when all its parts are contributive to its construction and interpretation. He liked to say this explicitly by quoting the age-old adage that life is primarily about the journey, not the destination. Throughout Walter's life, much of what he tried to achieve was what he himself would call autodidactic tutorials, opportunities for self-instruction, from which the most valuable lesson to learn is that being alive is more rich and meaningful when it is unanticipated and fortuitous rather than rigidly planned in advance. If you know in advance where you're going, he often said, then it probably isn't worth the trip. As with all artifacts, Walter Hamady once wrote, books, collages, and assemblages are evidence of the process that made them, and the process is as complex and as interesting as the human beings perceiving it. One can see in the world as much as there is to see in oneself, one's elf.